So we're now standing outside the Historic Croydon Airport. Its official title was the Airport of London, and it actually was the predecessor to Heathrow. So this was Britain's international airport through the 1920s and 1930s, just as air travel was being established around the globe. So it's incredibly important, incredibly busy, just as airports are today. The building we're actually standing in front of was opened in 1928. It was a new terminal that was built here to replace the original airport on the site. And when it was built, it was the world's biggest, most advanced airport terminal. And really, it's the first modern airport terminal that we recognise today. The first in those steps to reach those mega airports that we're all now so familiar with. So we're just going to talk a little bit more about the history, some of the amazing historic events that happened here. Amy Johnson and her record-breaking flights, Imperial Airways being formed here. That's the forerunner to British Airways, British National Airline. And we'll just show you a bit more about the building. So the location of the Historic Croydon Airport, it's on the Purley Way. Now the Purley Way itself was one of the first bypasses built in the UK, constructed in 1925 to try and bypass the traffic going through central Croydon. So it starts in Purley and goes up to Thornton Heath. And you may recognise some of the buildings behind me as well. So it's just opposite the road from the colonnades. So the building itself, as you've driven past it, is quite imposing, a big white building, and it's at an odd angle to the road as well. Many people wonder why that is, because most buildings are built square to the road frontage, but of course this wasn't built as a building to front the road. It's actually an airport terminal. So it's actually square to the airfield, which is a slight angle to the road, because the road's not actually directly north and south. So that's why we get this very slight angle. Behind me, you see an aircraft. Now you may wonder, as you drive down the Purley Way, what this aircraft's all about. Well, it's actually a de Havilland Heron aircraft. And it's this type of aircraft that flew the very last commercial service out of Croydon Airport on the 30th of September 1959. It was Morton Air Services, it was a scheduled service to Rotterdam, and it was captained by Geoffrey Last. He had the distinction of being the last commercial pilot to fly from the airport. We're now standing in front of the gate lodge for the airport. This was built in 1928 next to the Purley Way. So the point of the building is to act as a point for the porters for the airport to be stationed with their trolleys to help passengers as they're arriving to load up their bags, and also as a security point as well. It's actually that role that got developed as the airport went on. So it became the point where the police were stationed here. There's also a small detention centre if people had the incorrect documentation to come into the country, and also a first aid post as well. So that's how it was originally used. Once the airport closed, it was no longer part of the airport. So it was actually then sold off. And you'll actually notice it's next door to the TGI Fridays site. As you come down the Purley Way, you'll see that. So they don't use it as part of the restaurant. The building at the moment is actually on the Heritage at Risk Register. So this is a list run by Historic England of all the buildings that are important, that are a risk in the UK, that might be lost through decay or just general dereliction as well. So the outside of the building is being repaired, but it's still awaiting repairs to the interior of the building. So we're hoping that once those repairs are completed, and that should be done maybe within the next year or so, we're hoping it can be brought back in use. And for us, the Historic Croydon Airport Trust, we're hoping that we can move our archives back into this building to bring it back into use for the community. We're standing now on the south side of the terminal building. And the building was split into two halves, really, because two things happen at airports. Things come in and things go out. So this is the side of the building where things would go out. This is the facilities that we use for cargo handling, for goods coming into the country, for mail, for bullion. It will actually all be handled on this side. So this would have been the bonded stores. So goods would have been flown in, they'd park up on the apron and they'd be unloaded by hand, because we didn't have mechanised cargo handling at the time, and then put into these storage facilities here. Once they've been cleared by customs, vehicles would come in off the Purley Way, They back into these doorways and they'd be loaded up with either goods or freight or bullion or airmail, and then they're then driven out onto the Purley Way and distributed around the country. The airmail service was particularly important, so that was really one of the highest speeds of communication at the time, and it was funded as well to make it quite cheap, and a new scheme was introduced in 1934, the Empire Airmail Scheme. And those post vans at the time, special post vans and post boxes, were all painted bright blue, and you could post a letter up in London, and an hour and a half later it could be down here on an aeroplane at the airport of London in Croydon, ready to go off somewhere around the world. As air traffic grew and the freight grew and the mail grew, the terminal needed to get bigger. When it opened in 1928, it handled 27,000 passengers a year. By the outbreak of the Second World War, it was handling 200,000 passengers a year, so a 9-fold increase in just over a decade. So to facilitate the increase in traffic and the passenger growth, they extended the building. So they extended the building forwards, and actually if we look up there, we can see 3 doorways together. And also upwards, they had another half a floor as well. So that happened during the Second World War. And then later, when the airport, once that had closed, there was the final extension to the building, which you can actually see on the roof line here as well. We can see that the rear story is extended backwards. We can see that slight change of styling as well. Whereas on the ground floor, they've tried to keep it the same. We can see the styling of the windows are different as well on the top floor, especially going forwards. They're very square and functional. As during the Second World War, they had limited resources. They're trying to conserve materials that they need. And then of course, when we come into the 90s, again, it changes again. We can see the introduction of UPVC into the building. So we've got the original steel frames with these quite stylized windows, these aesthetics, and these nice grid lattices around the windows. The changes through the Second World War, and then we can see the changes again as we move into the 20th century, and we see a different styling of windows. So you've got sort of 3 periods of the history there. One of the things that are really important as well, this was the predecessor to Heathrow Airport. So this is one of the busiest airports in the world, and it's the busiest airport in Britain. So this is handling over half of all the passengers that are flying into the UK. It's handling around about 65% of all the airmail and about 85% of all the freight as well. So it was incredibly important for the economy and for getting goods in and out of the country. This would have been the main apron for the airport. This is where it would have all happened. This is where the aircraft, once they've landed, they would come in, park up in front of the tower, passengers would get out and then go into the terminal, and then new passengers would come out onto the apron and get onto the aircraft. Engines running, they'd be loaded up, and this would be a hive of activity. We see aircraft coming in and out all day long. And this is somewhere as well where Amy Johnson would have parked her aircraft up, ready for her record-breaking flight to Australia, and many other record-breaking pilots as well. So this really was the major hive of activity of the airport. This control tower became operational in 1928. And when it opened, it was the world's biggest, most advanced air traffic control tower. There was nothing like it at all anywhere in the world. Britain was very much a leading light in developing air traffic control. And this was built based on the knowledge they had gained from the first Croydon Airport that was here, starting with the first tower in 1920. But we can see a truly huge structure. Small by today's comparison, but at the time a real giant. 50-foot tall, with the radio mast on the roof. That gave it another 30 feet of height, so 80 feet in height, over 4 floors. And we can run through what each floor of the tower does. So we'll start with the very, very top. So right at the top, you've got your aerial installations. So you've got a vertical tower for radio communication, so communicating with aircraft, and also a wind dynometer as well. And that wind dynometer fed all the way down to the first floor where the meteorological office was based at the time. We'll also see we've got some aerials sticking out of the corner. They look like giant girders. They were actually for radio direction finding as well, so that's very, very important. And it's the first steps in using radio technology to help aircraft navigate. And really it's the precursor to radar that we have today. So on the very top floor, that was the heart of the operation. That's where the air traffic controllers were based. There was actually two groups of people working in there. We had the radio officers. So they're the team of people who are trained in using the aircraft equipment on wireless telegraphy, Morse code to communicate with the aircraft. And then we also have the air traffic controllers, who at the time were known as Civil Aviation Traffic Officers, the CATOs. So they were the group of people who are actually managing the flight. So they're communicating with the aircraft, they're planning where these aircraft are, where they're going, the height they're at, and they're getting that operational information and bringing it all together, passing it on to the radio officers, who will then transmit information to the aircraft and then collect those return messages. So it's a hive of activity up there, and they're managing the air traffic in and out of the airport onto the intercontinental air routes. So that's right at the very, very top. Now they're very, very busy. The operation is 24/7. So just below that balcony we can see on the tower, we have another floor, another level, and that is for the rest facilities for the people working in the tower. So there was three sections there. You had a section for the radio officers, a section for the CATOs, the Civil Aviation Traffic Officers, and also a section for the meteorological officers as well. So, and they would try and get some rest there overnight. Below that, the first floor, we just touched on this already, the meteorological office. So that's where the weathermen and ladies were. So they're collating information about the weather, making forecasts, recording wind information as well, and passing that up to the tower. So that information can be passed on to the pilots. So the pilots have got real-time information on what's actually happening with the wind direction and strength at the airport. And on the ground floor here, this is where the customs officers were based, and also the traffic assistants. So the customs officers are checking people's documents as they're coming in and out of the country and checking the aircraft. And also we have the traffic assistants who are actually loading the aircraft up or unloading as they arrive and depart the airport. So that's the functions of the tower, all over 4 levels. And pretty much most towers are actually still built in a similar way today. We still have the communication arrays right on the roof. Right at the top you have the air traffic controllers, and then you have all the support functions in different parts of the tower as it goes down the tower. So we're now standing on the southwest corner of the terminal building, and we're going to take ourselves back to 1939, the outbreak of the Second World War, and this building became RAF Croydon. The civilian airlines have moved out, and it's now under 11 Group Fighter Command. We then see the Battle of Britain. This airfield was very much on the front line. We had fighter squadrons based here under 11 Group Fighter Command, defending the airfield and defending the south of Britain. On the 15th of August 1940, we see a mass raid by the Luftwaffe. They're spending all day bombing the south of England, trying to gain air superiority. In the evening, they've launched a massive raid, and they've actually targeted the airfield. So the airfield was bombed, the local factories and the local civilian population. This corner here was actually bombed out, a direct hit, and we lost the whole of this wall. And what we can see here is the result of that bomb damage and the attempts to build it afterwards. So we notice we've got these nice wide columns at the top, but on the ground floor here we have these very skinny columns, and that was the result of that bomb damage, and then the engineers trying to close the building up to make it operational again, and just using the materials they had, and also the time pressure. They didn't have the time to recast the concrete blocks to match the aesthetics of the original design of the building. So this is really a lasting memory of that building, memorial to that time of that bombing raid on the 15th of August 1940. We're in the control tower now on the very top floor, and we can see what actually happens here in 1928 and throughout the 1930s and later on until the airport closed. So this was the heart of the operation. This is where air traffic was controlled at the airport, en route on the intercontinental services. And behind me, right there, we can actually see the radio room itself. So that's where the radio officers would be based, and they'd be using the equipment there, custom built by Marconi, to talk to the aircraft, to communicate with them, give them information about the conditions en route and at the airport and airports en route, and also helping them with direction finding, using the radio transmissions to highlight their position, get that bearing where the aircraft were and give them a heading to steer to come to the airport. Or also taking it a little bit more sophisticated as well, actually doing a position fix. So it's a really sophisticated operation for 1928. At the time, it's the world's most powerful air traffic control centre, very powerful transmitters, and it had a range of over 200 miles, controlling all the traffic in the southeast of England. Now, of course, it's a part of our museum, and this is something that you'd see on our open days when you come to visit us. So around we have some interactives that show you how air travel was accomplished back in the 1920s and 1930s. We can see some different aircraft types, and we can see how the fuel calculations were made as well, and some various other aspects of how the operation worked. And here we have one of the interactives showing wireless direction finding. That was a really important innovation that happened here in 1922, and the predecessor control tower before this one, and then was taken to another level when they opened this new superpower super control tower. And this really was a really important innovation, because this is the first time that radio technology is being used to help pilots navigate, and that was a really, really important step. And of course this then further develops into systems like radar, and then systems that we have today with GPS, global positioning systems, that everyone has in their smartphones. And this is the forerunner of that. Technology that's now 100 years old, but has its roots here in Croydon.